Hello everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. In today's episode, we're going to talk about whether you should EQ before or after compression. So this, of course, is a question that gets asked of me and many others all of the time. And I see loads and loads of comments and frankly, there doesn't seem to be any consensus. I think that's probably because the answer is, what is the best thing to do at the time? I'm going to give you a few examples of where I EQ, or why I EQ that way, and how I use it, whether it's before or after compression, or a combination of the both. So let's get started. Now here I have a lead vocal by the rather wonderful Caden Cashmere. And if we listen to it without effects for a second, you're going to hear this.
Then we're back to the start, now we're splitting apart. The roads are shifting, our worlds apart. We've been here before through these sliding doors.
It's right in the top of her range, she's pushing, it's got loads of energy in it. And what have I done? Well, firstly, I've got an REQ with high passing on it. You can see the high passing at 100 here, 104. And then I'm going into a de-esser. It's a single band compressor, which is set at 5.5K here. So this goes to the RVox.
Then we're back to the start, now we're splitting apart.
And the RVox has got about 7 dB worth of compression going on here, maximum. We can go to the loudest part here.
Sliding doors.
Probably never goes more than about 4 or 5 dB. So about 4 or 5 dB worth of compression. That's the first part of the chain. EQ, high passing, going into a de-esser, which is a single band compressor set to 5.5K, and then into a compressor. So why am I doing all those things? First of all, the REQ is wiping off low end in the singer's voice that isn't necessary. Many of you might realize that low frequencies take a lot of energy. One of the most simplistic ways of thinking about it is like when you go to a concert and you've got these huge PA systems out there, and you may have 10,000 watts or more per side, say for instance. Well, in many PAs, it can be 60% of the wattage, the actual output, is just the very, very low end itself, believe it or not. You can have like 6,000 watts in like low mids and below. The thing about low end is it takes a huge amount of energy. Meaning, if there's like low end in her vocal that I don't want, that might compress earlier than anything else. So I am EQing immediately before I go into any kind of compression, let alone de-essing. It's a really smart thing to do. I will exaggerate for effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off all these other things that are going on, and I'm going to leave the EQ up and use the RVox. Let's go to...
No one's ever been able...
Okay, so there's a verse part. Now I'm going to take this EQ off, and I'm going to change it. Go low there, put it on so we can boost it.
No one's ever been able to stop me in my tracks before. You're a...
Now first there's a whole bunch of noise coming in the background, like air conditioning and maybe foot noise and all that kind of stuff, because we have got, 15.5 dB of low end that we don't need.
No one's ever...
But I want you to do one of two things. I want you to listen, but also in this instance, actually want you to look over here and see how much compression is going on.
No one's ever been able to stop me in my tracks before. You're a beast. No one's ever...
So some bypass.
Been able
Put it on.
To stop me in my tracks before.
We're getting like 2 to 3 dB of extra compression in there. Now that's all a bunch of low end that we don't need at all. Now I've boosted it there for dramatic effect. Let's find a different instrument to illustrate that. Here we have a piano, and I've done some judicious EQing on this to help it fit in the mix. I've actually rolled off a lot of not only low end, but low mids. I've also boosted some high mids, and then low pass got rid of high end above about 8.5K. So here is a before, After. It's a Yamaha C7 and I'm playing it pretty aggressively like this, and it's quite compressed. You can hear it sort of smushed together. A lot more defined for those high mids. Now, if I put a compressor after this, now let's apply some compression. Bring the threshold down, ratio up a bit. We're getting 2 to 3 dB worth of compression there. And what's nice is the high mids are boosting into their compressor, so they're being compressed early. You actually see and hear, most importantly, the effect of the high mids from that right hand going na 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 na. Have a listen again and also look at the compression. Now let's take the EQ off. You'll notice, you'll see and hear something pretty dramatic. The left hand is playing a sustained part, holding down low end. The right hand, as we were noting earlier, is putting a lot of movement in. Where, with the EQ applied before the compressor, you'll notice that the compressor was bouncing along really nicely and just controlling that right hand. Now have a listen in bypass. It's just not doing the same thing anymore. Now it just feels like it's being strangled because that sustained and emphasized low end is just blah, blah, and that is dominating the compressor. So all of that beautiful bouncing right hand stuff that was being nicely controlled by the compressor, and you could have some fun adjusting the attack and release time so you could maybe bring a little bit more attack back into the right hand, has all disappeared. Now it's just compress with slight movement, but pretty much it's all being sucked down by the low end. That is why we will EQ before compression. Otherwise, the low end is dominating the compressor. That is why master bus compressors now have sidechain and high passing functions on them, so that the low end can pass through and not control the compression, because that effect will happen. We can do a demonstration of that in a second. Unbypass. So now hear it with the right hand controlling the compressor more. What I like about this is I hear down, 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 down. Now I take off the EQ. There's a little bit of that downbeat chord, but nowhere near as dramatic and nowhere near as aggressive. I've got far more control of what I can do with the compressor here. There is audible and visible, if you want to look at it, far more movement going on now because the right hand is now controlling the compression. All of it's high mid movement rather than sustained low notes. Number one reason why we would use EQ in this instance before compression. Now let's think about this from the point of view of your master bus. Now here we have opened up the T-Rex compressor, which I'm a big fan of and you see me use a lot, especially in a mastering chain situation. What this has is a sidechain high pass filter here. Why am I using this in a discussion about EQ before compression? Because obviously this sidechain function is built into a compressor. I think this is a perfect way to explain. What we could do is we could take the whole mix and send it to a pair of identical buses. So it appears in two places at once. One of the buses could have an EQ on it that was sidechained to a compressor. So what we could do is we could use the send from that without any low end, just have it all removed and then control the compressor. It's a way you can work, but it's a fairly complicated way. So we're not going to get into spending a long time talking about this. The reality is there's so many compressors like this T-Rex, which is for 15 whatever it is, 20 years now since this has been out, has had this function the whole time. Now, most compressors do have sidechain functions. You may wonder why they're useful. Well, they're useful for exactly the same reason we just described. They are applying EQ before compression. In this case, high passing, meaning removing low end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the whole mix in the chorus. I've got the input down a little bit so it doesn't hit it too hard. We've got the side chain on at the moment. I'm going to turn it all the way to the left. Let's have a listen. Wow. Look at that. Dramatic volume difference. Why is that? It's because the low end, at least that's what I'm going to claim, the low end is absolutely destroying the master bus and just compressing everything because the low end is getting to it first. So what are we going to do? I'm slowly going to sneak up the sidechain high pass filter and listen and watch. I don't subscribe to looking at plugins as much as listening, but in this instance, look at the meter over here and you'll see at the moment it's minus 10 dB, and see what happens as I bring up that sidechain high pass filter. Now at 90 hertz, we're getting about 3 to 4 dB worth of gain reduction, which on a master bus compressor is a little aggressive, but not that aggressive compared with 10 dB. It also sounds a darn sight better. If I go in and out of bypass, you're going to hear barely a volume difference anymore. Everything is better now because the mid-range and the high mids and the high end is nicely hitting that compressor, and it's not being destroyed by this 10 dB worth of compression that's being applied by the low end. This has been a massive revelation in even hardware compressors. They are all putting sidechain compressors in. So when people ask, why do you EQ before compression? That is the number one reason. You EQ before compression, you're either going to want to remove stuff which doesn't even need to be in the signal whatsoever, but will influence how the compressor works, or you want to use a sidechaining function, allowing the low end to breathe and come through, but then compress the mids and the high end evenly to give you aggression in the mix. So that is number one reason why I will EQ before. Now, where I have sounds, for instance, that we have controlled going into a compressor, then afterwards I might go back and add more EQ afterwards. Let's have a quick look at that. So we're going back to our vocal setting here. Now what we've done is we've removed the low end, going into a de-esser, but most importantly going into the compressor, because the de-esser is just catching high mids that are aggressive and painful. So we're back into the RVox, really generic, love it sounding compressor. I got into it because Michael Brower was using it all the time, so I was like, oh, okay, I better hear that. It's a great compressor because it's just one control with a gate. And then here's what gets interesting. I'm using another high passing because obviously after the signal has been compressed, if you've already wiped out a bit of lows and then you're going into a compressor, obviously that stuff that's here will get compressed and the lows will come up a little bit. So I'm high passing again after the compressor, again about 100, but I'm also doing a little high boost, just a little bit over 7K, and that's going again into a compressor.
Then we're back to the start, now it's split apart.
If I take that off,
then we're back to the start, now it's split apart.
it's almost a little nasally and a little bit lispy. In fact, it feels like I'm actually losing some of the S's and T's that I may have gained earlier. So I put the EQ on where there's the high boost and the low cut.
Then we're back to the start,
now it feels more musical to me. She feels much nicer in the track. Let's have a listen.
Then we're back to the start, now it's split apart. The roads are drifting
Let's put on some delays and reverbs. So you can see with many things, especially vocals, it's a combination of serial, EQ, and compression. De-essing for me always has to start almost immediately. Even though I high pass, I didn't do any boost of the high mids. And I wouldn't do that until I ran at least a de-esser on the original vocal, so I'm not boosting something that I don't want there in the first place. So putting a de-esser on early, if not first or second after a low cut, is very important to me. Get that de-esser on early because you don't want to start brightening a vocal up before doing some kind of de-essing because you're going to catch all those sps and T's are going to explode all over the place. Another reason for doing the high pass or the low cut, which is probably easier for many people to understand, is the plosive. So a lot of those are right down there below 100. So just by putting that on early on means that you're going to reduce having to go in and do automation afterwards and turn them off. Another great reason for doing that. Of course, the same for foot noise that gets picked up by the microphone. Sometimes the singer accidentally knocks the stand and you hear this boom, boom. That low cut can get rid of that. Maybe not entirely, but get rid of the worst of it. I've been in mastering studios where a vocal has not been high passed. Trust me, I've been in mastering studios with an un-high passed vocal acoustic. And the person who mixed it was like, oh yeah, it sounded great in my studio. All I heard was like low foot noises and boom, boom, and boom, and just horrible stuff. And the mastering engineers cleaning it all up. And to a certain extent that was possible, but it would have been absolutely lovely if the only low lows there were just like that low E on the acoustic. It would have been so gorgeous if that just rung out. Instead, he had to get in there and pull out low-end rumble and just make the track a little tiny bit thinner than it could have been. If the vocal had been cleaned up, if the acoustic had gone in there and done some really nice detailed work, the mastering engineer could have left that low end in and it would have been so dramatic when the guitarist played big open chords. It would have been so beautiful. So high passing is incredibly important. That is, remember, a form of EQ. So high passing into compression is EQ before compression. It's controlling how the compressor works. Then after the compression, I'll brighten it and probably put a de-esser after the brightening, just so it's not too excessive. But by brightening it and maybe also doing some more low cut into a compressor, it will make the whole vocal feel airier. And remember, once that's compressing, some of the low end will come up. So you might find sometimes in vocals or specific instruments that don't want a huge amount of low end, you might end up high passing it, low cutting it, 2 to sometimes even 3 times. And that is okay because it will control it. It won't feel like all the low end's being removed because the signal's being compressed. So every time it gets compressed, that low end comes up. You cut it, you compress it, it comes up. You cut it, you understand what's going on there. So that's why EQ before and also why EQ after compression, because once it's nicely controlled, I might want to brighten it some more. Hopefully that all helps. Let me know, what do you do? Do you EQ before and after? Do you use a combination? Do you use the same kind of tricks of either high passing or low passing so that you know once it's compressed, it's not exaggerating those problems? And what other instruments do you do EQ and compression on in a serial method like I do here on vocals? I know I do it on electric guitars where necessary. Do you do the same kind of thing? There's also, of course, dynamic compressors which solve a lot of these issues as well. And there's wonderful compressors like that out there as well. We can do a whole episode on that, and we will. So have a marvelous time recording and mixing. Please let us know what you do and how you do it. And have a marvelous time recording and mixing. And I'll see you all again very, very soon.